First off, to positively prove that there is no God, science, which is really a whole lot of different fields, would have to examine everything there is and decide that none of them are God. No one really thinks that this has happened or even could in principle ever happen. Instead, the claim is that the scientific viewpoint has explained so much, things that religion and God used to explain, that there is no longer need to believe in God and nothing for God to explain anymore. Especially when it comes to what people fundamentally are and where we came from, some people claim that scientific materialism provides the complete understanding of the world, life, and human beings without appeal to God or anything supernatural at all, like a spiritual soul. Scientific materialism makes the expansive yet fundamental claim that all that exists at all are physical beings, their properties and the necessary physical laws which govern and describe their past behavior and invariably predict their future behavior. Physical things themselves are nothing more than atoms and molecules combining and interacting according to these necessary physical laws. These elementary parts come together into complex bodies and ultimately developed into complex systems of interaction we call living things, defined chiefly by their ability to replicate themselves. But ultimately, the living things are what they are and do what they do exclusively because of the particles, atoms, and molecules that make them up, and the properties and forces they generate or are subject to. Nothing beyond the material world and its elements is believed to be required, nor even allowed, since scientific materialism claims that its physical explanations are, or will be, totally complete. One consequence of scientific materialism is that human beings are not really free. This is a pretty common view in the world of academic science and philosophy, and probably elsewhere as well. For instance, John Searle is a pretty well-known philosopher who explains that this contemporary scientific view does not allow the possibility that human beings really have personal freedom, even though our subjective experience tells us that we do. Why exactly is there no room for freedom of the will on the contemporary scientific view? Our basic explanatory mechanisms in physics work from the bottom up. As long as we accept this conception of how nature works, then it doesn't seem that there is any scope for the freedom of the will, because on this conception, the mind can only affect nature insofar as it is part of nature. But if so, then like the rest of nature, its features are determined at the basic micro levels of physics. It seems that intellectually one has a choice here. Searle recognizes the incompatibility of his contemporary scientific view with the feeling that he is free, and so he decided the scientific view was more well-grounded, and chose to view his feeling of freedom as an illusion. Searle acknowledges that it is just a fact of our subjective experience that we think we make decisions freely, but science tells us we can't. To my mind, it has always seemed as though the denial of personal freedom that scientific materialism requires should weigh heavily against its truth. This denial of personal freedom makes complete nonsense of almost every aspect of social life: personal responsibility, promises, pride, shame, regret, praise, blame, heroism, cowardice, and other concepts besides. Even the act of saying thank you. For if we are determined by our physical makeup, personal history, and environment to do what we do, none of these concepts would ever be fittingly applied. It would be just as inappropriate, I dare say incoherent, to praise or blame a clock for displaying the time accurately or erroneously, since a clock would be just as determined to exhibit the time it does according to the same necessary physical laws. But such terms do make sense and can be applied truly or falsely to human behavior. But this determinism also makes a farce even of empirical science itself, and the arguments that people make in favor of scientific materialism. For as we said, scientific materialism claims that every event in the world must be the necessary result of the physical properties of things, their ultimate atomic constituent parts, obeying necessary laws of physics and chemistry. This would apply also to beliefs and conclusions, since they are themselves reduced to physical states in the brain. In this theory, brain states, like every other physical state, are ultimately just the necessary result of physical properties of brains, neurons, neural transmitters, synapse firings, obeying necessary physical laws, that is, brain chemistry. Thus, the brain states of a conclusion of any theory are the necessary physical results of prior brain states, and, like everything else, are completely described and governed by these laws of physics and chemistry. If this is true, then brain states for a conclusion of any theory are not the logical result of the meaning and truth of the premises. That is, the neural configuration in a person's brain of any conclusion are not the result of the meaning and truth of the neural configurations of the premises which preceded them in the person's brain, but the result of brain chemistry. And if the meaning of the premises of an argument do not provide the reason for holding the alleged conclusion, the argument is a bad argument, or at least meaningless for convincing people of its conclusion. But scientific materialism also claims itself to be a theory, or system of beliefs, and so it is claiming to be the result of true and valid arguments, that its conclusions are logically based on premises. Thus, it seems a logical conclusion, if not a physical necessity, that if scientific materialism is true, the premises of any argument never provide a reason for a person to hold the alleged conclusion. Brain chemistry is the true, that is, physical reason a person believes a conclusion. Thus, if scientific materialism is true, scientific materialism and every theory is false, or at least irrelevant. But as with the undeniable truth of personal freedom, it just seems obvious that theories and arguments do explain, whether well or poorly, and cause what and why people believe what they believe. Indeed, part of being convinced by an argument is choosing to accept that the premises are true and the conclusion validly follows from them, and that one has an obligation to accept the conclusion as true, which implies a freedom not to. So this is one argument that scientific materialism cannot be true. But scientific materialism is based on the success of science to explain things without need for anything beyond the physical, like God. But since it fails to explain itself, it cannot show that God is irrelevant. None of this proves that God is real. This argument, and others like it, just show that science has not proven that there is no God. If you want to read more about these arguments, I have a link to what I have written about them elsewhere. If you have questions of your own, feel free to ask them in the comments or message or email me. Thanks for watching.